Gyroscopic-Precession meets pendulum with wind turbine, or at least an air screw free to windmill. And we are, of course, watching paint dry, or at least, in this case, if not paint, Danish oil. Here on Radiator Pine, and here with Tuna australis and Casuarina subrosa, mountain or black oak and red cedar, which in what sunlight there is looks like this. As I said, watching paint dry. This was given to me about 25 years ago, perhaps 30, but I don't think it was quite that long ago. Yeah, maybe it would be 30 years ago. The fella who made it was in jail, and the jail had a pine plantation and a sawmill and a wood workshop. So this is a case for a big cigarette lighter. I think what he's done is found a knotty piece of pine. He shaped it in an oval bigger than his Bic lighter. Then he's cut the end off. He's put the cut off end aside, and then he's drilled into it and he's rasped away until he could fit his cigarette lighter inside of it, and then he's glued the top back on. Anyway, all he had was araldite, 5-minute araldite to finish it with. And that finally started to fail with the passage of the time and the chemical of the instability and God knows what else. So therefore, but and because, I've sanded it back to bare wood, and this is its second hand rub coat. You'll get another hand rub coat, and then it might get 2, perhaps 3 coats without any sanding. To see how smooth and shiny and wet looking I can make the thing finish up. Whereas this was the first attempt. At a laminated wooden 2-bladed rotor or air screw for the Peltier effect thermal electric fan or stove-top fan. And I originally used something more or less approximating a Clark Y section aerofoil, but then after some experimentation, having had a bit of a go using a high lift, low speed aerofoil section, basically taken straight off my ultralight motor glider, on the theory that the electric motor wasn't making this thing turn very fast, and that turned out to be a complete waste of time, because in airspeed terms it was going a hell of a lot faster than the wingtip on the ultralight motor glider. So on the third attempt, I came up with a slightly thick sectioned version of what you use on a boomerang traditionally. Sharp edge, thickest part of the section at 50% cord. With a cylindrical tangential section on the top surface, because it's low drag, because the last thing you want your boomerang doing is slowing down in rotational speed. So you don't want to put any unnecessary drag. So I figure when you haven't got very much electricity to run your motor with, maybe a low drag aerofoil section on your propeller might be a clever idea. And this one suffered a big ding in the trailing edge on one blade when the whole stovetop fan fell off the stove. And something else was going on, don't know quite what. And on the other side, when it was on my daughter's stove, she has a detachable top plate which has a little hole in it. And at some point, the fire basically died down to the point where the thermatic fan stopped working, and hot air coming out of that little hole on the detachable top plate came up and burnt the varnish and burnt the wood before anybody noticed that the fan had stopped working and it needed to be lifted off and allow its heat sink to cool down again before it would start having a temperature difference between the heat sink on top and there we go. The gyroscopic kicks, when it gets going with a bit of velocity, are sufficient to actually knock the axle up and down and change the angle of the dangle, which has been the bane of many a wind turbine. When you get a sudden change in the azimuth of the axis of rotation, you get either an up or a down movement on the ends of the axle, depending on which way it's being rotated and which way it is revolving. Gyroscopic precession, they call it. Go ahead. Ask me how I know about what happens when gyroscopic precession gets the better part of your wind turbine's bearings. Hey? How would I know about that? Oopsie. What do you reckon, eh? Doesn't everybody keep their shattered wind turbines and crashed dead friends' propeller remains, and with one's own crashed propeller remains in a suitable repository? There we go. Enshrined in the chitting of the house. Too good to throw out, too good to use for kindling. Spent too much time making it, too many memories attached to them, therefore they got to be kept. Call a man a pack rat. See if I give a shit. Okay. See? Yeah, it's a gyroscope and it'll rotate. But then it moves about 5 or 10 degrees out of line and all of a sudden nothing lines up anymore and it just swaps orientation. And the kick in this case put an upward force on that end during the gyration. Have to remember to keep one foot on the end of the tripod that's being used to position the camera head at exactly the correct angle to show off this phenomenon. When all is well. And unless you build your wind turbine with really, really super strong bearings and a very authoritative tail boom, then gyroscopic precession means that every tiny weeny little bit of turbulence that comes along, you get slightly more airspeed on one blade than you get on the other blade, and that out of balance aerodynamic drag out of the tips yaws the wind turbine from left to right or from right to left, or before you know it, bang, 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 it turns 90 degrees out of the wind and stops. And all of the stored energy that you had in the rotating gyroscope of the disc has been dissipated in hammering the crap out of your bearings on the main shaft. And it'll frighten you. I know it bloody frightened me while I was trying to turn a wind turbine off, and I hadn't thought it all through. So anyway, the ding in the trailing edge, that's been repaired with sodium bicarbonate and cyanoacrylate, aka superglue. Because I wanted to repair it and leave it obvious that the repair had been made. In hindsight, I probably should have used and could have used wood flour and cyanoacrylate. But I just, thought it might be an interesting idea to use the tip that a whole bunch of people have been talking about on YouTube at the time. And it's a workable thing. So this is the restored, refinished, refurbished, recarved or resanded, but reprofiled #1 attempt. It was suggested to me that the second prototype could be recarved, and I said, oh no, I think I'd rather keep that as an example of what does not work. And the third version was on my mother's thermatic fan, which my son inherited when she died, and he inherited the house. So not a grand deal of point at talking about this without being able to show it to you, and that was a very nice little sequence. Not quite random and cascading, because if you've got the mathematics, if you can deal with the calculus and the multiple simultaneous variable equations, you can predict where it's going to go. But then we stuff around with all that by adding a pendulum factor, because it's hanging on two strings about 1 metre long. And any time that gyroscopic precession takes over, what was a stable situation suddenly becomes a dynamic instability, and off it goes. And like I said, this is profiled and sectioned to be an air screw, not a wind turbine. So if you had a wind turbine there, it would wriggle around a whole lot more, because it would be designed to extract, well, it would probably be pulling something close to 55% of, at least 50% of the energy in the air column going through it. It can't get any more than 59.63%, because that's the Betz limit. That's as much energy as a wind turbine can remove from the passing airflow and put into a rotating shaft. And in this application, we've got no drag except the friction on the oiled drill going through the middle of the wood. So it kind of magnifies what's going on, shows it off to great effect. See? Twirling quite happily, suddenly it gets out of whack, turns 90 degrees, and look at the angle of the dangle of the shaft and how it's been shifted. So, I trust this was almost sort of kind of interesting, or at least not actually boring. But I suppose you fellas are going to be the judge of that, eh? Damn. Easy to forget when you haven't got your teeth in and the shape of your mouth is slightly different from the one you expect it to be, and the cup in your lip slips. Warbles, I'd like to YouTube. Ciao. Small things amuse small minds. Or so the saying goes. Ciao. See, worked more better at that time. They don't call them dynamic sculptures for nothing, do they? I can hear gusts in the surrounding trees, so I'm hoping for a bit of decent illustrative axial twists and reversals. See, watching paint dry is fun, isn't it? remove that bloody white painted wheelbarrow wheel and the aluminium griller tray used for engine changes on the generator, to get it out of the shot for an earlier part of the video, and now the bloody things were in the background of this when I wanted a dark background for me sunlit attempt to show gyroscopic precession, but it's not rotating, it's just spinning. Or maybe it's not spinning, it's just rotating. Take your pick. Well, it did start to spin, but once again, every time it starts up, gyroscopic precession has other ideas. But it's certainly showing off the Danish oil to good advantage. There we go. Thank you very much. Yahoo, yippee, universal creator God theory. Finally, eventually, if I sit there and capture enough video, up comes a gust that demonstrates what I want to show. It's not that I've got an extra special relationship with the weather gods, I'm just persistent. And it's coming on to the time of year when having a functional Peltier effect operated thermal electric fan on top of the stove is going to be a good thing. It's also a pretty good way to demonstrate that this thing's in pretty good balance. Not quite down to the proverbial cigarette paper, but it's functional. There you are. How fractal is that? I think I've got it framed so as it's showing the shadow of the air screw in frame behind the air screw, playing pendulums, spinning and rotating and dancing to the gyroscopic precession. But I can't actually get my head in there to have a look, because anytime I get my head lined up with the back of the screen on the camera so I can see it, my shadow blanks out everything. See? So, such is life, Ned Kelly. Such is life. Ciao.